Hi and welcome to the Trading Bell Show. We are here at the Privatization Authority offices. We'll be speaking to Dr. Kosgei, the CEO and MD, to understand their mandate first, progress they have done, and much more. Dr. Kosgei, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Great. Let me start by asking you to help our viewers understand, and the listeners as well, what the Privatization Authority mandate is according to the Privatization Act number 11.
Thank you very much, Maina.
Yes.
Let me take you back to after independence.
Yes.
But it's very important to appreciate where we're coming from, how we came into being, and why we're doing what we're doing.
Yes.
After 1963, when we attained independence, it was very necessary for government to be able to carry out, its economic, development activities. So one of the very critical aspects was that there was need to establish, parastatals, or we can call state-owned enterprises, with a view and perspective, of achieving certain, national interest and goals. And one of these was to redress areas where there were imbalances in terms of economic development. There was also a need at that particular point to make sure that, the economy of the country was actually Kenyanized. And therefore, there was need to establish, state corporations to be able to address some of these issues and be able to achieve what the government then, after independence, wanted to make sure that the country achieved, its economic plan activities. So that in itself then brought into being the creation and establishment of parastatals. And there's been a process of reforming these particular state corporations. It started in 1979. There was another one in 1982. It moved on until 1992 when, there was a policy that was put in place to be able to guide on how state corporations could be managed better. And that is when the first cases of privatization happened, but then under the National Treasury. And this process went on until 2005, when the feeling then was, it was then very necessary that we have an institutional framework where there is an entity that is tasked with the responsibility of managing the reform process of state corporations, and particularly the ones that had been identified as not being strategic. And therefore, in 2005, that is when we had the Privatization Act that established the Privatization Commission under Section 3. And so the Privatization Commission then came into being on the 1st of January 2008. And the responsibility of the Commission then was to do what you're calling formulation, which is the identification of what to privatize, management and implementation. And that went on until last year, 2023, when then there was a review of the Privatization Act to take into consideration so many things that had happened, including the fact that, Kenya in 2010 had a new constitution. And therefore, we needed to align the Privatization Act with, among others, the constitution. And so come October 2023, that is when the Privatization Authority came into being. So what do we do? So our responsibility is to continue the government program of reforming certain state corporations which are not strategic for the country. As we did indicate, some of these were established that time to redress economic imbalances. But given, what has happened over time, that has been achieved. And therefore, then the question that comes in is, do we still need to continue having some of these state corporations being run by government? And therefore, then the question then comes in, I think in some instances, the sectors where we had established state corporations to be able to achieve certain purposes are being achieved. We are private sector now, vibrant and very busy and operating within those particular sectors. And therefore then the need arises that privatization comes in. So ours is to carry on with the process of midwifing the process of transfer of assets belonging to certain specific non-strategic public entities into private hands. And that is what we do.
No, I think that's very clear, and thank you so much for that brief definition and introduction. I'm curious because you've mentioned there's a strategic look at some of these key sectors. Would you care to give some examples that really, people would really appreciate to understand why this is important? Examples of some of this strategic
if you look at, for example, hotels.
Yeah.
During that particular period, it was necessary to establish some of these hotels in certain areas.
Yeah.
As part of redressing the economic imbalance that was there after independence. And part of the strategy that government then used at that particular time was to come up with joint ventures, between the private sector and especially foreign direct investments with government. And I can give you a very good example, like the Hilton.
Yeah.
The Hilton was established as a joint venture between the Hilton Group and
the government.
Yeah. We have the Intercontinental Group was established as a joint venture between the Intercontinental Group and the government. So as we moved on, then the question that then comes in is, should government continue in such sectors? If you look at the economy today, there are many hotels.
Yeah.
Government need not necessarily get involved in running hotels.
Okay.
So that's basically one of the sectors. So, and there are various of them, where then we're seeing private sector is very vibrant. We have a regulatory mechanism in place where then government is able to regulate the activities. And with that, there's really no need in some of the sectors for us to continue participating in economic activity as government.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the key things I would like to ask you is whether you have a mandate as well of advising government, for example, because I know government is invested, as you said, since then in various other sectors. Some of them we actually end up discovering. And for example, I think one of the key ones I saw is that I didn't know we had a development bank, for example, until recently when they were launching a branch in Mombasa, and I thought, oh, okay, so it's a government entity, such kind of areas. But do you see it as well to advise government and tell them it's time that we, release this? It's time that we start thinking about moving on away from this particular area. So do you advise?
Let me put it this way.
Yes.
Since the coming into force of the Privatization Act 2023, there has been separation of policy and operation.
Okay.
And therefore, in terms of the identification of what to privatize, that is a policy issue, and the Privatization Authority is involved in the operations.
Yeah.
So where do we come in terms of advice to the government?
Yeah.
The identification is a process that involves many parties, which culminates in the gazettement of some entities for privatization in what is called a privatization program. Once that has been established and we have it in place, then we come in by way of doing an assessment of that particular entity that has been identified. And this is where you will look at why was this particular entity established? What was the purpose? Has that purpose been achieved? It is part of what we carry out in terms of the assessment. We look at the financial analysis of that particular institution. How has it been operating? Is it making profits? Is it making losses? Why? So we go into details in terms of establishing what it is.
Excellent.
And having done all this, we then come up with what is called a privatization proposal. Now, in this privatization proposal, we will be indicating that this particular entity was established during this particular period with the objective of achieving this particular purpose. Does it still do the same? We will give an advice that in our assessment and looking at what is within the market, maybe, maybe not. We will advise government that looking at this particular entity, maybe we can do 100% divestiture or we can do partial, again, based on the assessment. So our advisory role comes in after the assessment. And then we make recommendations, and those recommendations then can be taken by government, either accepting as it is or make certain recommendations. So our responsibility over and above the assessment is to provide that advisory to government in terms of how far should we go in terms of this particular process.
Fair enough. Let's point out some of the successes that has happened over the time since you've been doing this. Are there some you could point out?
Since we started privatization, we've had, actually, let me say, a number of success stories that we have. We have the Safaricom. much as maybe did not happen under the Privatization Authority,
Yeah.
but it's part of privatization, and
Yeah.
it's something as a country we are proud of what we see today.
Yeah.
We have Kenya Wine Agencies. Now, this was a company that was struggling before 2014, when the first phase of privatization took place. And if you were to look at the progress that company has made from that time to today, it is tremendous. And this is where you can actually be able to point and look at how successful privatization can be. It used to operate within industrial area, but today, as we speak, they have a multi-million facility at Tatu City. And if you look at the role that it plays in terms of paying taxes to the government, employment opportunity that it creates, I mean, it's really a success story. You look at KCB, it was a small bank before privatization. It's grown, it's now even done regional expansion. And, everybody knows the story. So we have Kenya Re, So they are success stories. We've actually been able to see the benefit that have arisen from the privatization. And we can actually talk about, these success stories as being that which should actually help us in terms of then looking at it as a country and saying, I think the future is, I think privatization is where to go.
All right. You've been, as I started by the introduction, in the circles and conversations of what would really be happening if the process was fast enough and we are seeing this move, especially when it comes to matters on the markets, because listing some of these companies are there. I've seen it in government circles as well, trying to address what you guys are doing. But I want to understand, what are the challenges that are there? Why are we not seeing as fast movement probably as should be expected?
In the privatization process, it really involves engaging a number of stakeholders.
Yeah.
And therefore, it is very important that you carry everybody along.
Okay.
And so, if you look at the process from what I did indicated, we have parties like the public, who are really the key stakeholders.
Okay.
We have the entities themselves with the employees and the board. They need to be carried along in terms of understanding how are our interests being taken care of in this particular process. We have people who supply to these particular institutions. We are financiers. Now, when you start the process, you need to make sure that you engage all these particular parties so that then they're able to have a buy-in by being assured that this particular process will not work against them. That becomes very important.
Yeah.
Number two, there is the perception around what should we privatize. There's a school that believes that you need to privatize those entities that are making losses. Another school feels that no, you need to fatten it fast before you can privatize.
Yeah.
When you identify that which is profitable, then the question you get is, why privatize when it is working? So balancing this becomes a bit of a challenge. And given the emotive nature around privatization, you cannot rush. We've also had even instances where some people have gone to court in the past, where then they are challenging, why are we doing 1, 2, 3? And we've had to explain, we've had to do some sensitization, and we've managed to achieve through an ADR mechanism, where then after explaining what it is, how they're going to benefit, why they're not going to lose out, the assurances, then we've been able to see some progress. So the challenges that we face normally are issues around perceptions. Sometimes you get negative publicity, that people feel that, this process is flawed, Kenyans are going to lose. So you see, with that, it takes time for you to be able to win the confidence of the people that the process as designed is such that it is transparent and open, and there are not going to be any losses. So you have to carry everybody along. And that process of carrying everybody along is not something that you can do quickly. So it is very important that you get buy-in for you to
from
be able
everybody
to succeed in the privatization process.
Now, that looks like it's quite cumbersome, because when you have to involve all these particular stakeholders that you mentioned, it's quite a huge task. And I'm just wondering, we might never see the light of day then, because this is quite a huge, if I may call it, quite a diverse stakeholder that needs to be engaged, especially when it comes to the public and all that. And looking at a country where we have even political goodwill that you have to buy as well, because anybody can raise a voice. What would be the solution? Do we need to, I don't want to think of what I'm thinking, but we need to have a voice that really moves things, because at the end of it all, everybody will wake up, put injunctions, do whatever, and we might never see the light of day. And yet we have institutions, as you've said, that would do very well if they were privatized, and others probably would do better. What do you see as a solution to this? Because I know you sit at a place where you're like, oh my, another court case, another blockage.
What we've been able to see is when you engage the stakeholders, and we've done stakeholder mapping, we've been able to identify what they are their needs, what they are their concerns. And arising from this, we've then been able to come up with some communication and stakeholder engagement mechanisms, where then we've been able to explain and address their concerns, and we've seen some buy-in. What we need largely is a forum like this, where then you're able to reach quite, a wider scope of stakeholders that we may not reach through, the small groups that we have, where then you have workshops, maybe you have conferences, occasional appearance in the media, where then you're explaining. But if we were to get opportunities, for example, to get into radio and be able to reach out to many of the people, even in vernacular, stations, you get opportunities, for example, to through the media, like this kind of opportunity, then we then create that opportunity where we do public education, we do public sensitization, and with what we've witnessed right now and the progress that we've made so far, and the support that we're getting from the government, I am seeing us making a breakthrough. And very soon. Yes.
So let me ask about what is in the process now. I mean, I know you have several highlighted, some that could have already gotten you to stop through courts and all that, but are there some that you've already identified that these are companies that we want to see hopefully go through the process?
I think, let me put it this way. We have some court cases at the moment, so
and you're not allowed to talk a lot about that. Fair enough, I understand that. Let's talk about then the future plans and methodology, because people would really then wonder, okay, then what are the plans then to ensure that this comes to fruition? So in light with that, as the authority and the plans in the future regarding your initiatives here.
Let me, because one of the areas where we've experienced a bit of resistance has been people understanding the process of privatization. And this was one of the challenges we learned along the way, that people did not understand what the process entails. And as I said earlier, I think it would be good for Kenyans to appreciate that process. And this is part of what we're actually doing as plans. Once, for example, you've done the assessment, as I did indicated, then it goes through some process where we call technical implementation committees. And this is where we now look at these particular reports in detail before coming out with that particular proposal. And one of the other mechanisms that we have in place is what we call steering committees. Now, these steering committees entail teams beyond, what we have within the Privatization Authority. We have representatives from the parent ministries where these particular entities identified for privatization are domiciled. So they come in with that element of what is the policy direction, what do we want to achieve. We have representation from the National Treasury, and we also have representation from the Attorney General. After that process has been done through the steering committees, then it goes to the full board, where then the reports are reviewed, and once approvals are granted, we do what is called a proposal. Now, this proposal, as I said earlier, includes what is the method of privatization that has been identified, and what are the reasons why we identify that particular method. And then it goes to the National Treasury, which is our parent ministry. CAP memos are done, and then it's taken to cabinet. After that, then the approvals are granted, and we do the implementation. As all this is going on, we continue sensitization. And we've come up with a plan of making sure that we make a reach to many of the people to be able to appreciate and understand the process. So if you look at that process as it is not individual driven. There are various stages of approval. And therefore, that should give Kenyans the assurance that this particular process is very transparent. If I gave the methods of privatization, for example, just to be able to illustrate, we have 3 methods identified within our act. One of them is IPOs. Now, IPOs, this is where you talk about taking shares to the stock market. So after you've done, valuation, and you've come up with a price per share, then there is a process that you do through the capital markets, the NSC, among all these parties that are involved. This process in itself is very transparent and is open to everybody. If we, for example, identified a method of privatization like public tendering, this is where you advertise for people to express interest. It is open to everybody. And it is subject to some reserve price, which will have been achieved through a valuation process that is done by experts who are onboarded through a competitive process. It's advertised. And therefore, we want to give Kenyans that assurance that the processes and the methods of privatization that we have are so open that you cannot be able to manipulate. And that is why it is open tender. There are others where we have constitutive instruments of those particular entities identifying and saying that before you sell these shares to somebody else, give first right of refusal to existing shareholders. And therefore, they're able to exercise their preemptive right. So that process, and with the explanations, and Kenya's now appreciating that this process, as it were, and the way the process is laid in law, that is giving people the confidence to see that, after all, this process is actually transparent. Number 2, there is also a mechanism where, if for some reason or another, you're not happy with some process, you have the free hand to be able to do an objection, where you indicate the reasons why you're not happy with the process, which section of the process, and why. If after the objection you're also not happy, there is an appeals mechanism, and there's a review board that looks at all those particular aspects. If you're also not satisfied with the review board, you can go to the High Court, and you can follow all the way to the apex. And the most important thing, once we conclude a privatization process, we publish through a Kenya Gazette who has acquired shares in this. We even go to the extent of detailing who those shareholders and the beneficial owners of that particular company that we will have already given the shareholder. So Kenyans should have that assurance that this process, as it were, is very transparent, and you can interrogate anything anywhere along the way. And that is what we are trying to do in making sure that we educate our people, we do sensitization to be able to appreciate and look at the values and benefits of privatization.
I think you've addressed actually my other question, which was about the transparency and accountability, which is fair enough. So then, as we come to a close, I want us to do it now then here, because Kenyans are here and they have listened to you and they have heard what this is all about. And we want to convince them why this is important. And I think one of the best ways to convince people is to really show them the impact it would have on not just maybe the economy, or even just probably even to a lot of the things that we're talking about. I mean, with the season of even budgets and all those things, and maybe you could actually probably paint a picture to them that this would have this particular effect on the economy. Convince Kenyans why this is important.
I have given examples of success stories. We don't need to tell anybody where Safaricom is today. If you do a comparison of where that company was at that time before privatization, where it is today, we can see. But I think more importantly, the question that we start is, why should we continue holding into some of the entities that the purpose for which they were created has been overtaken by events? And I'll give a very good example. What does it mean if you continue holding into a company that was established for a certain purpose, the purpose for which it has been achieved, and maybe it is not doing well? It is a commercial entity and still relying on support from the exchequer. What is the meaning of that? The meaning of that is that, one, we have either to borrow money from outside to be able to finance. We have to pay these through taxation. And if we have a variety of needs, especially support essential services, what that means is it will actually arise in increase in taxation to be able to maintain some of this. The whole essence of having commercial public entities is to be able to one, pay government money in form of taxes, pay government in terms of dividends. Now, if that is not happening, the question then that we need to ask ourselves is it really necessary? And so if we've identified public entities and they are not strategic in nature, and when we talk about strategic in nature, this is where it is involved in providing essential services, or it is one providing or carrying out services or activities of a security nature, issues health and environment. So then the question is, if it is not within that, and it is not, giving the benefit as it were before, we can have the private sector, it is well developed, and we have a very clear regulatory mechanism. Why should we? So that presents us an opportunity where then the dormant assets that we have can be sweat more, and we can be able to start seeing a return on investment. It gives opportunities for people in terms of creation of employment opportunities. It creates multiply effects where a once dormant, public entity now in private hands is very vibrant, and the people within that particular environment can be able to benefit. So there are so many benefits that arise from actually having some of these dormant public entities not, being able to sweat the assets to its maximum and give a return can actually give benefits to Kenyans. And that is really why I want to plead to Kenyans. Let us look at these things in a very sober way, look at those which we need to retain, and all of us will agree that this is what we need to retain because of the following reasons. But for those where private sector can do better, and we've seen the benefits from the success stories that we've talked about, I think it is incumbent of all Kenyans for us to support so that then we make the best of these assets and get a return on investment that will benefit the entire country, the economy, and the society at large.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Koskei. And I hope that you have been convinced why this is a direction to some of these particular entities that really have been outlived in terms of purpose, as Dr. has put it. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much, Dr. as well, for your time and for explaining to Kenyans. I leave you now with the market.